Started. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Tesla stock is up 0.5%, basically flat today. It was down about 2% in the morning, recovered throughout the morning. Overall markets, S&P 500 flat, Dow Jones flat, NASDAQ up 0.4%. Gold is up 0.5%. Crude oil is down 0.5% to below $69 per barrel. Russell 2000 is down 0.4%. Let's see if there are any news. Check the audio calls. Audio is great. Perfect. All right, great. Um, Tesla, Nvidia, Google, Amazon are the highest traded stocks today. Apple as well, or the Mac 7 companies. Google is up 1%. Micron is down 2.5%. Micron is actually trading at very cheap levels right now. Let's start with reading. Um, Bit more steepening in the yield curve today. 5-year Treasury yield is down 4 basis points after the consumer confidence index showed plunging confidence in March. And we're going to go into detail on that one later on. Let's read this article as a starter. US consumer sentiment tumbles for fourth month in a row to 4-year lows. Fears over tariffs mounts. US consumer confidence plunged to the lowest level in more than 4 years in March, with households fearing a recession in the future and higher inflation because of tariffs. The conference board said on Tuesday that write-in responses to the survey showed worries about the impact of trade policies and tariffs in particular are on the rise, adding there were also more references than usual to economic and policy uncertainty. The survey's measure of future expectations hit a 12-year low and breached a level associated with an economic downturn. President Donald Trump's on again and off again tariffs have been panned by economists for sowing confusion and uncertainty that they say was making it challenging for business to plan ahead, the detriment of the economy. Trump on Monday indicated that not all of his threatened duties would be imposed on April 2nd, and some countries may get breaks. But at the same time, said tariffs on imported automobiles were coming soon. Consumers are rattled, said Carl Weinberg, chief economist at High Frequency Economics. At great personal risk, we will opine that the chaos in Washington has something to do with this. The decline in consumer sentiment since November election can no longer be written down as a coincidence. The conference board said its consumer confidence index plunged 7 points to 92.9 this month, the lowest level since January 2021. So that would be even lower than the early 2022 when there was a regional banking crisis. Economists polled by Reuters had forecast the index sliding to 94. The fourth straight monthly decline in the confidence mirrored a similar deterioration in University of Michigan's consumer sentiment measure, which has also erased all of the gains notched in the aftermath of Trump's election victory in November. The drop in confidence this month was driven by consumers over 55 years old. That's interesting because that's where the Tesla's um, average buyer is. It's about in their 50s, white male, high income, household income of about $150,000, $160,000. That's the average Tesla buyer. Morale among those in the 35 to 55-year group also worsened, but confidence rose slightly among consumers under 35. Confidence slumped across income groups, with the exception of households earning more than $125,000 a year. Consumers had over the past few months been generally upbeat about future income. Consumers' optimism about future income largely vanished, suggesting worries about the economy and labor market have started to spread into consumer assessments of their personal situations, said Stephanie Guicard, senior economist, global indicators at the conference board. Rising recession worries. The survey's expectations index, based on consumers' short term outlook for income, business, and labor market conditions, dropped 10 points to 65, the lowest level in 12 years, and well below the threshold of 80 that usually signals a recession ahead. The proportion of consumers anticipating a recession over the next 12 months held steady at a 9-month high. Despite the gloom, consumers showed little sign that they plan to dramatically curtail spending. There was a slight decline in the share of consumers planning to buy motor vehicles over the next 6 months. Many intended to purchase television sets and household appliances like refrigerators, microwaves, and washing machines. The conference board said the increase in plans was likely preemptive, buying before tariffs lead to price increases. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So that means if and when we get April 2nd tariff increases, we should see a plunge in purchases in April. If, in fact, customers, buyers were pulling forward their purchases into Q1, we should see a drop in April, May. Kind of like what happens to Tesla sales before and after tax credits in the country end. Still, that could probably support consumer spending and keep the economic expansion on track for now. Many consumers plan to go on vacation over the next 6 months. Actually, I'm seeing some weakness there too. So that's interesting. Consumers' average 12-month inflation expectation jumped to 6%, the highest since April 2023, from 5.8% last month. Consumers' average inflation expectation jumped. Yeah. So January, February, March, in all surveys, we're seeing confidence dropping sharply and inflation expectations rising sharply. US stocks were lower, the dollar eased against a basket of currencies, US Treasuries yields rose. The survey's so-called labor market differential. This is another one that was kind of eye-opening. The survey's so-called labor market differential, derived from data on respondents' views on whether jobs are plentiful or hard to get, climbed to 17.9 from 17.6 in February. This measure correlates with the unemployment rate in the labor market department monthly employment reports. So, lower employment expectations, high inflation expectations across the board, but with a highlight of consumers about 55 years old, and some deterioration in the 35 to 55. This is Tesla's main consumer group right here. Although all the sales have actually been doing better, but I think especially used vehicle sales have been doing slightly better in recent months than what I expected. But that's for general industry. So these are ICE purchases, hybrid purchases, cars below $30,000. Those are the ones that are doing a little better. And we're seeing Tesla's inventory growing. Tesla just worked down its old Model Y inventory in the US. So it's getting ready to launch the lower priced Model Y in the first week of April, in the coming days, really. And I will see. I expect a 0% kind of low interest rate, 0 to 1% low interest rate financing coming soon after. So maybe May or June. So sometime in Q2, I think we're going to see low interest financing for Model Y necessary. I mean, we're seeing it already in China. After just 2 months of Model Y production, Tesla had to bring back the 0% financing because the demand is just so low. Even before BYD and Xiaomi started eating into Tesla's market share, Tesla is struggling. All of them have been eating into ICE market share in the last couple of years, but I think the market has been saturated a little bit, so it's going to be, eating each other's market share at this point. So now we're going to see what the competition is like in China. Tesla has the benefit of, Elon's $300 million political donations to the Trump campaign and Biden's protection of Tesla as well, meaning Chinese automakers can't compete aren't allowed to compete in the US and Canada. So Tesla sales in US and Canada are probably fine for now. I guess Canada not so much because of all the politics, but US probably fine for now. But this is a global market. So there's also one more thing: the Toyota Rav4 hybrid and Toyota Camry hybrid inventories were pretty low until this year. So that supply bottleneck has been. I think we're seeing some weakness because of that as well. All right, let's see what else. New home sales were lower than expected, but that's not that big of a deal. We talked about consumer confidence. I'm going to pull it up next to see if we can gain some further insights into it. Before that, one note on Nvidia. I know some Tesla investors have Nvidia shares. Actually, before we switch, at the top of our screens, Tesla's resale values plunging 3 times to 4 times faster than average. I didn't see this coming. I think this is mostly because of this is, by the way, just U.S. This is mostly because of Elon's political activism. There are really people who are turning in their Teslas because they don't want to be associated with Elon, especially in liberal states like California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. I mean, I know some, you know, it's pretty widespread, more than people realize. And you can see here in this chart at the top of your screens. Um, and I tweeted this earlier, so you can find it on my account as well. Tesla resale values are plunging 3 times to 4 times faster than average. So CarGurus index average in the last 90 days was 0.9% drop. Tesla was 3.3% drop. Okay, so that's just the last 90 days. In the last 30 days, CarGurus index was up 0.3%. Tesla was down 0.3%. In the year-over-year period, CarGurus index is down 2.7. Tesla is down 6.9. And this is before Tesla starts um, Tesla starts producing the new Model Y in high volume. So when Tesla starts producing the new Model Y long range, real wheel drive, etc., I'm guessing somewhere around mid $40,000 range. But then in a couple of months, it's going to be accompanied by a 0% or a 1% low interest financing. So that's another value of $10,000. So effectively, you're bringing the new Model Y price to less than $40,000. So in that case, um, used Model Y values will plunge at an accelerating rate, and the inventories will surge throughout this year. That's going to also pressure Model 3 sales as well, because if I can get a 2-year-old Model Y for the same price of a low mileage Model Y for the same price of a new Model 3, why would I go with a Model 3? And we're going to be able to get used Model Y for less than $10,000, used Model 3 for less than $10,000 by the end of this year. And I think then we're going to see what the kind of sustainable demand for new production Teslas is like. Of course, the one thing that can change is obviously if FSD becomes perfect overnight, all of a sudden, etc., which is kind of like the pipe dream scenario. Um, then it could increase demand for both new and used Teslas, but I just don't see that coming with hardware 4 or hardware 5. I also think the recession has started. Um, I see some weakness in some leading indicators than what is available public data. I do some my own research about this kind of stuff. So um, the weakness is pretty apparent and widespread. And we'll see. I mean, I think this April 2nd kind of can change things a little bit, but I just don't have really confidence in the um, like in the administration. I watched some of these interviews. I'm like, they're not making sense, especially the Commerce Secretary. All right. Wave is coming up. Let's see what he has to say. Let's see if Nick has a FSD update for us, and then maybe Ekti can come up and talk about a few things. Wave, how are you?
Good, yeah, man. How you doing?
I'm good.
Just finished a hike, so perfect timing. I had a question on what your logic is when you say hardware 4 and hardware 5. That surprised me when I don't think I've heard you say hardware 5. You don't think it would be capable, given they are at least announced June, July timeframe for robotaxi unsupervised. I'm assuming maybe by unsupervised by end of the year, and that might have hardware 4 or 5, at least 5, maybe even.
Yeah, let me find this. So I pinned at the top my December post. This post is from December, but I've been talking about this for basically throughout 2024 in these spaces. Highly recommend going into that post and reading the entire thing. So I found that based on looking at previous data, that FSD's progress is highly predictable. It's not a mystery. Okay. Couple of years ago, when I watched um, AlphaGo documentary, I'm sure many of us have seen that documentary. I've watched it several times. I've sent it to a lot of people about how fast AI is improving. Um, um, I assumed falsely that Tesla's FSD progress would be similar to how AlphaGo improved. I missed a couple of assumptions, a couple of reasons why that would not be the case. And so now that we have the benefit of previous data and how FSD has progressed in the last 5 years essentially. I think FSD beta started rolling out in 2020, so it's been 5 years now since we have FSD. And Elias does a great job on FSD tracker. I think he made a couple of changes 3 4 months ago that was asinine, that really reduced the value of the FSD tracker provides to people. Unfortunately, he got rid of the trimmed mean. I think he got pressured by the bull community to kind of get rid of a couple of features that really show what the true progress is like, as opposed to what the manipulated dashboard shows like. And so, anyway, despite that, I do some of my own analysis as well from the source data, instead of looking at the dashboard alone. But essentially, my forecast is hardware 3 allows up to 90% of trips completed without a critical disengagement. And hardware 4 is going to get to 99% by the end of this year. So that would mean hardware 4 V4 combined with V14 rolling out to the influencers by, let's say, Christmas. I think we're going to get to 98 to 99%. And the hardware 4 has one more year in its life. So next year, as hardware 5 rolls out, I guess with maybe the cybercab or whatever, we don't know. Next year, when hardware 5 starts rolling out to vehicles with hardware, V15, Tesla will also continue to optimize for hardware 4 vehicles. And eventually, I think hardware 4 is going to tap out at 99%, just like hardware 3 tapped out at 90% of trips complete without a critical disengagement. And so I kind of extrapolate that and say hardware 5 is going to get us to 99.9% in the next few years. Hardware 6 is going to get us to 99.99%. And this is US road, nationwide, etc. Okay. And then if you go along that, hardware 8 is necessary, in my opinion, for 99.9999%. So one accident, critical accident, per a million trips, million miles, etc., whatever we define it. And here's the problem: Waymo is going to be in a dozen cities by the end of next year. Okay. Um, and 70-80% of rideshare demand is in those cities. So Waymo is going to have ample supply in cities where most rideshare demand is by the end of next year. And Tesla isn't going to get to robotaxi level vision on the robotaxis until 2030s. They don't have the GPUs. They don't have the training capacity. They don't have the engineering team capable of developing Dojo to the level that exceeds NVIDIA. They don't have the free cash flow to keep buying these GPUs at ever accelerating rates, orders of magnitude more GPUs than necessary. And I had predicted this moment where people are seeing critical disengagement free drives, so they're getting excited about it. But what is necessary is that it has to be so good that they don't get excited about it. It becomes part of daily life. They don't even think about it. But it's not like that. We're nowhere close to that. We're orders of magnitude capable away from that. And for that, Tesla needs $100 billion of GPUs. And for that, you need free cash flow. You need a Tesla Automotive or Tesla Energy that's spitting out tens of billions of dollars of free cash flows, and that's not happening today. And Waymo is growing at a very rapid pace. So I think the ship has sailed for Tesla's robotaxi opportunity. It's gone. It's not coming. So if they do an FSD unsupervised type of service this year, um, what's going to happen is, let's say by the end of the year or June, who cares, right? Doesn't matter. Because what they're going to do is they're going to have like 5 cars in designated routes in Austin that have the best lines and maybe goes up to like 25 miles an hour. So if there's a problem, it's not life threatening, which is exactly what Waymo and Cruise did in San Francisco and then other cities for the last 5 years. They're going to start with drivers and it's going to take forever, and then it's going to like another year later maybe they'll remove the driver with those like a dozen cars. And that's not a valuable service. In the meantime, Weibo is now expanding to DC. They're expanding to Japan, with cars coming from 3 manufacturers now instead of one. They're removing sensors. They're also vertically integrated into AI research. They build their own TPUs. So it's a tightly integrated operation, and they're doing great. And they have the backing of Google, which does generate tens of billions of dollars of free cash flow. Tesla generates a few $1 billion of cash flow without paying its CEO. Um, so, yeah. Yeah, I think the writing is on the wall. Does that explain?
Yes, I really appreciate your nuanced analysis and response, covering from technical to financial and competitive landscape. As you know, I'm pretty high conviction on Google for a lot of things, including their Waymo and their AI. So thanks for posting that. I'll
Yeah.
read it.
And you can see I posted one more, and this is from November. And I said, when people were like, "Oh my gosh, we're just doing 1,000 miles without a critical disengagement, and it's amazing," blah blah. And Elon's like tweeting a few months before that, it's going to be 10 times better. V12 is going to be 10 times better, and bullshit. And I predicted if ST12 completes 95% without critical for now, 13 will do 98%. Okay, and even with that, even if Tesla had hit that milestone, they're going to need 5-10 years for nationwide adoption for vision only vehicles. And Tesla didn't even do that. If you look at the efficiency tracker today, it's 97.5%, and it's only limited to hardware 4 vehicles. So imagine what the hardware 3 would do. So I think what seems to be like the improvement is mostly coming from the inference computer on the car, which is what machine had predicted like a year ago, and training compute. So you have to spend the money on tens of billions of dollars, and they just don't have that free cash flow. They don't have that cash flow. And without the free cash flow, you can't raise the money even with debt, even if you wanted to. And even if you did, let's say God gifted Elon another $100 billion, just like Biden did. Let's assume Elon doesn't take that money and put it in his pocket this time, and instead spends the money on GPUs. Even then, you're short of electricity. It's not like you can put these things up all of a sudden, and all the solar panels that were promised for the Nevada desert are there. Even then, you can't do it. So it's a shit show. However, whichever you slice and dice it, it's a shit show. Ekti.
So I respect your assessment, but I think it's gonna take longer actually it's gonna take years to get to 99%. Because if you look at FSD tracker, it looks like it has peaked since 12.5.1. I mean, there's slight improvement. It's 96% to hit that, and now it's 97%. And it keeps peaking at 97%. So who knows how long it because usually with AI it goes up rapidly and then it peaks and then it costs based on many other research papers, it peaks and then it takes more money to just get a small increase. So maybe you're
Yeah.
right, but I think it's who knows how long it can take because everybody has been wrong about assessment about AI, even the best experts. So you know you could be
Okay.
right though.
Thank you, Jimmy.
I think you're correct as well. Um, the issue of electricity costs is not something that is really being discussed yet. I'm yet surprised that the Trump administration doesn't make a mention of it. It's one of the part of inflation. It's one of the elements of inflation that has not been analyzed. Why has the cost of electricity gone up? And how are we going to figure this out from an infrastructure point of view? Uh, but I guess they have so many other things to worry about. But this affects the EV industry more than anything else because that is basically the only correlation how much money you save versus fuel. So I would say this. My only conclusion is over time, the cost of electricity, as you mentioned, will probably go up, and therefore the cost savings of having an EV, if the tax credits are removed, do not become a significant gap. And as you said earlier, hybrids would probably be the most logical solution. Um, Some people, as you also mentioned, earn negative equity for their Teslas that uh, they would never be able to save more in terms of uh, electricity costs versus fuel, gasoline, than they would have if they had otherwise bought a hybrid, which, from what I can see from the market, is losing equity value far slower than an old model Tesla. And those are for obvious reasons. Older model Teslas, as you mentioned before, have different technology, worse technology. People don't want it as much. And the newer Teslas are ridiculously expensive for their price point. And people will switch to that who can afford it, leaving the older used Teslas in an awkward bind. And you could see this in effect with Hertz and the other car companies that have these as rentals, where essentially their assets of their fleets are really reduced in value, making it even harder for those companies to stay afloat. So this is actually having real world implications right now.
Okay. Marcus is selling off for some reason. Let's see what if there's any headlines. I don't see any headlines, but Trump says he's seeking debt limit increase in the tax bill, according to Politico. Trump administration plans to freeze family planning grants. Sources say family planning grant freeze will affect about $20 million designated for Planned Parenthood affiliates. Trump administration to freeze family planning grants while checking for DEI efforts. Sources say Wall Street Journal. Health officials investigating possible measles exposure in DC. Okay. Jimmy.
Could I add something? Yes. Two parts. One part is it's more than just the U.S. market sell-off. If you look at emerging markets, those stock markets have been hurt really badly, and it's much more than people would have thought. So just check out the Thai stock market, Vietnamese stock market, and some of the smaller ones. People may not take these particularly seriously, but they're good indicators, forward indicators of future global growth. Um, and essentially, the only way to increase growth, especially increase shareholder value in these emerging markets, is either A, the government spends money by creating an investment fund that essentially buys the stocks directly, B, and creates incentives for foreigners to invest in them, or C, and this is usually the worst option, reduce interest rates, which are already, for the most part around the world, pretty low compared to the US long-term treasury. And so we have to understand this in a prism of low growth and inflation. Companies are figuring out that if these tariffs do take effect, export-driven countries are going to be very negatively affected. There's no way that the government will be able to help them. No amount of money spending could the government afford to rescue these companies. And finally, and I think people kind of understate this importance, the protests. I'm sure you're aware Turkey has protests right now, but not just Turkey, Romania, Serbia, the list goes on. Around the world, there are many countries in massive political turmoil. And in my opinion, it's a kind of political turmoil that no one's talking about, but has never been seen before. Never in history have this number of protests occurred against a moderate set of governments. These are not communist governments. These are not fascist governments. These are politically elected governments where 1/4, sometimes, of the whole country are out on the streets. I repeat, for example, in Georgia, in Tbilisi, an estimated 1.2 million people were out on the streets in one protest, independently verified. Yet the country only has 5 million people. In Serbia, 300,000 people were out on the streets. Country only has 5 or 6 million people. Turkey right now, there are 100,000 people on the streets just yesterday, and that's just the beginning. I don't think this will stop, and I believe one of the causes for this is the rise in prices. People blame these governments for not managing price rises, for basically ignoring the middle class who've seen their value eroded through reduced wages, and the marginal cost for the government to not invest in their own people compared to lining their own pockets is no longer an issue because the police will, for whatever they'll get paid that month, will basically destroy the protesters.
Okay.
And I believe that this will be a worldwide problem, and it's affecting global growth. Thank you.
Okay. My good life.
I just want to comment on the last speaker's comment that interest rates in emerging markets are low relative to where they are in the US. Brazil interest rates on the 1 year treasury right now are almost 15%. What's our 1 year treasury rate at? I mean, Mexico, their rates are close to 10% right now. So I have no idea where this person is getting that interest rates are low relative to the US.
Jimmy.
Sure, Thailand's interest rate right now is about 3%. Filipino interest rate's about 5.5%. List can go on and on. I think the problem with Brazil and Mexico are these are exceptions and not the norm. These countries are essentially Petrobras, oil-driven countries that had massive currency volatility because of how badly managed they were. In contrast, the emerging market countries in the middle income trap, who had been successful with pretty okay political stability in the last 40 years coming out of the Cold War, like South Africa, India, so on and so forth, are countries who are going to be stuck in the middle income trap for a very long time, who run large deficits. And essentially, the government is trying their best to stamp out lack of growth through extremely questionable investment practices, creating direct sovereign wealth funds that buy stocks directly out of the index to keep the floor of the stock market from falling out and to drive the narrative that they are continuously growing forever, when in reality, they will never go beyond the middle income trap. And the second, of course, is the cost of mortgages in these countries is about the same as it would be in the United States. The issue here is the collateral required. In these countries, and this is something that people don't understand, a lot of the countries that have relatively high interest rates, the collateral may be very different from those countries with relatively low interest rates. You may need to have 100% collateral to get 100% of the value of the house that you want to buy, which is nearly impossible for people unless their parents have a lot of money and they can co-sign it. So you have millions of people who cannot afford to buy houses, even if the interest rates are relatively low. And if they did buy a house and let's say wanted to rent it out, the value of the rental property will be always less than the value of the mortgage. So they're basically stuck. And it depends on the country if they allow foreigners to buy land, if the real estate goes up in value. But my problem with people like my good is they find a few countries, and these countries are always so badly economically managed. Brazil being a case in point, a very successful country 80 years ago, through 5 successive coups and massive currency volatility.
Okay, I don't want to. Thank you. So, Jim, you're saying that let's bring it back to Tesla. You're saying that there's a global issue growing where people are on the streets protesting, but we've seen this before. You're saying it's more in more numbers, greater numbers, and you see this
for the specific reason that price rises are forcing them to blame the governments for mismanaging the economy and corruption. This is not because they're against fascism or communism. And therefore, what are the alternatives? How can they find a government that suits them that will somehow manage to reduce prices? So both sides are in an impossible position. Protesters are trying to get something that won't occur, and governments have no power to give the protesters what they want. This is not an ideological issue. This is fundamentally an economic protest.
Ekti.
Yeah, so Jimmy is partially correct. I think there's people are sick of corruption and they're sick of sky-high inflation in regards to Turkey. I mean, in Serbia, there was people who died because of government corruption, so people got enough and they went to the street. I mean, to stop inflation, you have to jack rates up above the rate of inflation, and you have to balance the budget. There's no only way you're going to stop inflation. And many countries refuse to do that, and then they wind up very, very high inflation. And we have seen that in Turkey, he refused to raise rates. Even though inflation was at 6%, 7, 8, he refused to do it because of his Islamic religion. But I don't think it has nothing to do with that.
Sorry for interrupting, Ekta. Can we not just mention the obvious fact? The value of the lira went from 2.72 lira to the dollar in 2013 now to 35 lira to the dollar. Yeah, and this directly affects young people. And this is not just true of Turkey. It's also true of the countries I'm referring to as well. So people are asking. Okay, so go ahead. Go.
So I wrote that 7 years ago. I can send it to you to prove it. So I know it happened. And they're doing nothing to stop it. It's just getting worse and worse. And people have had enough. And I agree with you. I wonder how they're going to stop it. So
my question to Yaman would be, in a global environment of low growth, how would Tesla, which is based entirely on retail sales, ever get beyond a valuation from the 2020 euphoria era? It seems to me that the global investor sentiment is extremely tepid, and I see absolutely no indicators of how growth catalysts would be somewhere that would push valuations back to where they were during the era before, except for massively lower interest rates, which is simply not going to happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they could make robotaxis and Optimus work, that would obviously help, but I'm just not seeing the progress necessary on either front to become the leaders in the world. So, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's going to happen.
And I do want to point out something else in terms of global economic growth. We have to admit China has contributed substantially to global growth. And not only is it slowing down, but there's a wider problem. Global growth in the past hinged on technical innovation that led to great societal progress. But what about the plateau in innovation? Has anyone ever discussed that innovation is actually plateauing? Innovation that actually leads to productivity increases? Because I was in a space yesterday, they're saying reindustrialize America. And questions were asked like, okay, reindustrialize America. What about the jobs? So essentially, millions of jobs are replaced by automation. The economy improves, but millions of jobs are also lost. But you still have reindustrialization. How does this actually help economic growth?
Yeah. All right. Any other questions, comments? Jimmy, any views on Tesla's Q1? I know you're not very short-term focused, but Q1 deliveries are declining. Maybe Wave would be better to answer that one. Q1
I
deliveries are
think, of
declining
course.
very fast. They were worst in 3 years. Margins are going to be lower, I think, than people don't expect. Energy is, I think, limited. I think the prospects for energy in China are essentially nothing, not much, no profits. Jimmy, do you think it makes sense for Tesla to close down the Shanghai factory, given that Model 3 and Model Y are both losing money in China?
I do not think that for now, even though they are losing money. I think a bailout deal could occur where the Chinese government does take partial ownership of the factory, and they will have to do a partnership with a local Chinese company who I think would find it very, very valuable to have a Tesla brand in China. Some of these Chinese companies, we have to admit, are not particularly well known, cannot compete on their own, but have the ability to raise cash from local state owned Chinese banks, something that Tesla China can simply not do. So therefore, yes, they'll be operating at a loss. But historically, when car companies do that, for example, Renault and Nissan, it becomes a political issue, and political issues can be negotiated and compromised, and they'll live on as zombie companies. Is a zombie company better to have than simply having no company at all? I think that's the real question, because for the next 20 years, they're probably not going to be making any money at that factory. Although the brand could lead to valuable benefits in, let's say, Tesla Energy, maybe not now, but maybe in 10 years. And that might be the long term value.
I mean, how can Tesla Energy, let's say Megapacks, make money in China if Tesla vehicles can't make money? Because the energy products are more value of the energy products comes from battery cells, which Tesla buys from others like CATL and BYD, as opposed to the vehicle, where you can actually have a bit of a kind of brand value. So I think the competition that Tesla Energy is going to face in China is 10 times more intense than the competition that Tesla vehicles face in China. And Tesla vehicles lose money in China.
Yeah, I would love to respond. Maybe, and there's been talk of this, some regional governments, maybe Shanghai, people say, will enforce new rules regarding solar panels on apartment buildings and detached homes, whereby the roofs have to be solar panel roofs. And this for a variety of reasons, but mostly because um, one of the issues is as these cities expand and as people have to move into them, the energy cost should be borne by the new homeowners, in their opinion, rather than the infrastructure being borne by the provincial government. So, in that situation, as the rules change and as solar panels become cheaper to build at scale and thus install on roofs, it becomes more common to do this because of those regulations. Perhaps Tesla Energy will become the most valuable. Of course, the margin will be incredibly thin because they don't themselves build the battery cells, but the regulations would at least give them an opportunity for a real mass appeal product.
But Jimmy, even if solar, energy generation, wind engines pick up, and we need these mega packs for AI data centers and everything, why would Tesla be the one benefiting from it when CATL, BYD, and others are also have their own products and they're vertically integrated into battery manufacturing, which Tesla is not. They also have the backing of the Chinese government that Tesla does not. So why would Tesla benefit from that?
Very fair comments. One thing is, it's a two-part question, really. You're asking, what does China benefit economically versus geopolitically? Having a company that it can showcase to the world as a success story, that is a foreign one in China doing business, is one that they can use to attract additional foreign investment that they desperately need. Regarding the economic benefit, of course, they could always force, and I mean easily force, those companies to work with Tesla to maintain that geopolitical benefit. The ties between America and China should at least exist, even on the surface. Even if it is not significant, Elon Musk is a known quantity, and he can benefit China's brand soft power, especially regarding FDI. So they could simply tell one of those Chinese companies to partner and then help Tesla Energy China vertically integrate. This may sound like speculation, but there have been, if you watch Wideout or anything like that, a lot of rumors about regional governments trying to push for more green energy at a retail household level. And then talking about Elon Musk, if you go to China, very strange, despite what Elon is doing at the American government as an official worker, they constantly say this. You need to be more like Elon Musk. You need to think like Elon Musk. And they never say Jack Ma anymore. You need to build companies, be decisive like Elon Musk. If Elon
Yeah, I
can
don't know.
maintain that
I mean,
brand, okay,
I
thank
think
you.
I think this is a lot of soft comments that just really we need to see it in hard data, Jimmy. Hard data shows very intense competition on the vehicles. Hard data shows battery cells comprise multiple times the value of a megapack versus the vehicle, and Tesla is not battery. Like I said, all the points I made earlier. Adrian says in the comments, energy hardware margins are not the full picture. Software, aka arbitrage opportunities, would exceed hardware margins. I don't think that's true. I think the opportunity is low. The TAM is low, and the higher that segment grows, the more the segment grows, the opportunity really shrinks really rapidly, from my understanding. Energy arbitrage. So, and on top of that, it still doesn't address the main point I'm making, that BYD, CATL, other Chinese producers have their own products. They can do the whole thing. And this idea that Tesla has software superiority is, I think, debunked on many fronts, whether it's the vehicle software or autonomous driving software or energy software. So it's just, I'm not buying it. Wave and then XT.
I think there's a short window of a good business case on the mega pack for export and not necessarily internal consumption. There are countries that already have relationships and install base of mega pack, and these are long-term learning curve integration with the government and the companies. So there is a window for export that they can still demand a margin that's decent, nothing to brag about. So that's my thinking. And on the piece that, Jimmy, are you still in China?
Yeah, I'm in China right now. It's almost 2 a.m.
Yeah, the question I have there, I'm surprised that Chinese don't, maybe this is what I inferred, and that's not what you meant. There is a balcony version that is very popular uh, of in-phase battery module, solar balcony that's being used. Very similar discussion that you were having. A new owner comes in, and the new owner just hangs solar in their balcony. You don't have to go in the roof or anything. So each node can have their own in-phase battery solar integration. Aren't they doing that in China? Something similar to that?
You do see things like that, especially for outdoor lighting. But I would say this. Regulation is what pushes things. I'm sure you're aware. people doing it as a way to add value to the home, I don't know if it necessarily does add value. So it's a design decision on their part for now.
Yeah, but governments are subsidizing this where it does make sense for not only backup power, but running. And the most important part would be load leveling and being able to return it back into, there's different tiers that Enphase does and tying back into the grid as well too, or an apartment level. So you have an individual node at the
Maybe
balcony.
you're not aware of this, but there are conferences that occur in Shanghai and Shenzhen, very common conferences on energy. And there, each of the, not ministers, because these are provincial level, the Department of Energy provincially have to present how they're making the grid more efficient. And they talk about these types of things. Please install X because we will subsidize it. Please buy it. So therefore, it is advice. People do take up that advice. But they're trying to see basically market acceptance, and it may take typically 5 to 10 years for market acceptance to lead to actual regulation to roll it out on scale as a rule for new construction.
Yeah, I was trying to do an ROI for someone that's in Europe, and I send them the links, and I'm still working on figuring
Okay.
out a way to do an ROI on it.
Wave, are you still invested in Tesla? If so, what percent of your portfolio is in Tesla?
It was very significant, and now it's less than 5%.
Yeah. And My Good Life, how about you?
I don't own any Tesla.
Okay.
Nor am I short.
You're not short? Is there
I am
anyone
not
who's short
short.
Tesla? Is there
I
anyone
am
who's
thinking
short
about it.
Tesla in
I
the
mean,
space?
honestly,
Well, I mean, the time to short was above 400. You
Right.
know, I think we're like halfway there, but I just
I
don't see how
mean,
the stock doesn't drop below $100 per share.
given that Elon's buddy with the president of the United States, I think they're who knows what he
Yeah, but
can,
I mean, look at it. Trump
maybe
went on to the White House, and he
maybe
used
our
the White House
sovereign.
He used the White House as his showroom, displayed all the vehicles, and talked for a half hour about how great they are and everything. And there's no uptick in demand whatsoever.
Well, maybe our sovereign wealth fund will start buying Tesla stock. Who knows?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Yeah, seriously.
That's part
Also, I think Trump is, maybe he can have some impact on tens of millions of, one issue voters in the US. But even then, you're talking maybe tens of thousands of people in any given quarter. And Tesla's issue around competition, lack of innovation leadership, technology leadership it's a global issue. Trump can't do anything about any of that stuff. XT?
Didn't Tesla do some kind of a strange deal when they were building their first factory in China? I can't remember the details. Anybody remember?
I don't know what you mean. Wave?
Yeah, they were I mean, I don't know if this is what you were getting at. They were the only ones, they were the first ones that didn't have to do a JV and were able to wholly own their company.
Why does it
I
matter?
got,
They're not producing any profits. So they're
yeah,
they're absorbing 100% of the losses.
yeah, I understand. I was just answering that question.
Yeah, and
The-
Elon got a citizenship from China too.
oh, he did,
Yeah, some honorary citizenship or something. I don't know.
and he didn't pay 5 million for that one, bro.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there you go.
I just want to make one comment because I got to jump off for a call. The one thing that Jimmy brought up, I think it's probably the most important aspect in addition to the window with Waymo taking market share because of the time duration and the analysis that you did. And that one factor is this, he was talking about the worldwide protest and issues that's happened since pandemic. I've seen a significant um, inefficiency that has built in and despair built in many cultures around the world, and the joblessness and so forth, that ultimately goes back to Tesla customers' affordability at the end of the day, because you have that gap of the very rich and then the middle class is just dropping down into just worrying about putting food on the table. So I think that's probably the biggest factor, and I might go from the 5% down to 0.1%, just in terms of percentage.
Okay.
Have a good one. Thanks for your space. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Wade. Jimmy?
Am I allowed to piggyback on what Wade was saying?
Yeah.
Something that I find very odd is the attempt by governments to solicit investment in the strangest ways possible, but shows their complete desperation. Almost all statistics point to FDI going down substantially, with no recourse, no way of bringing it back up. And it's not. I believe it's not because treasuries are going to be higher yielding versus FDI in private transactions. I think it's basically because investment today that leads to job creation in these different countries um, is not really worth it anymore. Um, you can see how companies are changing. So, for example, this so-called golden card, this gold card, is quite ridiculous when you think about it, Yaman, because the green card is $1 million. This gold card is $5 million. And at no point did Donald Trump explain what the difference between the green card and the gold card really is. And it's just so incredibly desperate. And yet, so many countries canceled their gold visa programs, changing the names into investor fund uh, permanent residency or citizenship process visas. And the amount of money that you have to pour in is also odd because essentially what happens is you put money into a holding account that invests in a local ETF for their index for 5 to 10 years, depending on the country. And you're expecting to take a 20 to 30% loss because those stock markets, if you look at them historically, take those losses and you may get a permanent residency or citizenship for those countries. And yet the response in buying this stuff is very low. And the countries doing this are desperate for the appeal. So they're going to go through the chambers of commerce and talk about how useful it would be. But if you go to those conferences, almost no one shows up. There's very little investor interest in it. And yet it's not hard to get these things anymore. You could be a criminal of any kind and still get them. But no one, even the criminals don't want it because they know they're going to lose substantial amounts of money and the FDI is not worth it anymore. You can just hire people remotely. You wouldn't even have to go there set up a company anymore. So how will FDI work? How will the traditional model of economic growth work as we go forward? I don't think anyone really discusses this. You don't need to set up a company locally. You don't need to hire people locally anymore. Countries are suffering because of it. Joblessness, lack of economic growth. No one talks about this, and I don't think there's any fix to it.
All right, Jimmy. Any comments on inflation, recession probabilities in the US?
Well, the most recent data apparently proves that I'm wrong. Inflation's going down, unemployment is not going up, except for federal losses from uh, either contractors or tenured um, federal positions who are being phased out but are still on paid leave. So, discounting this, all the data indicates that Jimmy the Otter is totally incorrect and that we are not going into recession. The only reason why Trump proposed there might be a small, soft recession is because he's trying to prepare the markets for quarters of lower growth as he cuts. However, look at the long term. There must be a reason why Warren Buffett is not investing substantially. I'm sure he has a team that looks into the growth prospects of companies and he tries to figure out where the ROI will be. I have yet to hear from people in all these stock spaces who talk about how companies can significantly strengthen their ROI through R&D in the next 5 to 10 years. Either they raise prices, which I don't think is possible, or they create efficiencies in the technology to reduce costs, which seems very tough as they have to at least maintain or increase wages. So we'll see, but I do believe the chances of a recession are very, very high. It will not be a soft recession. It will be a global recession, and what we'll see when we come out of it is not good. After 2008, the recession that occurred was a credit recession. Companies had liquidity problems that was fixed by government by providing liquidity. There were some real estate problems where basically banks went bankrupt, but these are not issues to the core economy. So basically, these are not secular structural issues. These are cyclical. I would love for someone to come into a space and explain why the structural problem that they usually admit exists and the reason why Donald Trump got elected will not go away anytime soon. They usually can't. I mean, buying eggs from all over the world and then increasing the supply of eggs in the United States is a short-term solution. The truth is, America's cattle is at one of the lowest stocks in decades. Chickens, lowest stocks in decades. Farmers, as well, lowest numbers in decades. These are not cyclical problems, despite how many band-aids you put on it. So I do think those are small examples of a wider recession that will affect us for at least 2 years. And I don't see Warren Buffett jumping into the market anytime soon.
Jimmy, you said the recent inflation data proved you wrong. Inflation is declining. Where are you seeing that?
Well, there's global inflation data that comes out. In the EU, for example, inflation apparently went down or stayed the same in certain countries. The questions were, should the central banks actually cut rates because of the low growth? But, you know,
About US
you would,
US data, where are you seeing declining inflation in US data?
it's not declined, it's been stagnant. But
Mhm,
when are
yeah.
they going to cut rates? And if the rates are cut, would it actually lead to economic growth? Question to anyone who's willing to answer it.
When do you think they're going to cut rates?
I think they're not going to cut rates this year. I think they might
This
cut
year.
rates. Yeah, I think they might cut rates next year. You cannot cut rates when you have a president who constantly talks about tariffs. It just cut. The point of cutting rates is to send an
Well,
economic
yeah.
signal.
Let's go into tariffs a little bit. Ekti, just I'm focused on Jimmy for now, if you don't mind. Did you have something to say on inflation, Ekti?
Well, they can't cut rates when you have a sticky inflation. That's the problem.
Yeah. Jimmy, so you said you expected, I'm trying to find when you said you expected the government to be shut down. The Democrats stepped back a little bit, so the government didn't shut down. Now you're saying we're not going to get a rate cut. I think that we will. Are you willing to make a coffee bet on that?
How much?
One coffee.
One coffee. I'm willing to make a one coffee bet with you.
Okay, coffee bet. Fed will cut rates again in 2025. Yes. Actually, let's see. Fed won't cut rates in 2025. Won't cut rates in 2025. No, sorry. What's your handle?
On for buy me a coffee.
No, hold on. Let me. I can just find this real quick. Give me 1 second.
Oh, you mean on Twitter?
Man, people are like, how is Tesla losing money in China? People are clueless about the facts. Tesla bulls are clueless about the facts. Tesla is losing money in China. All right. All right. Jimmy 14624495. Fed will cut rates in 2025. Yes, no. All right. We have a coffee bet.
Payment due on buy me a coffee, right?
No, you can't pay me through Venmo. Usually we just do $5 via Venmo, PayPal, whatever. So
Okay.
I think the inflation is coming down. Inflation is coming down. It's a little slower than people expect. But one thing that can really put a wrench in that, obviously, is tariffs. Jimmy, what do you think is going to be the result of these tariff negotiations? On April 2nd, we're going to know more. Okay. And it's going to take some time to implement these things. So let's talk by the end of the year. Let's say the average tariff rate on imports to the US today is about 2.5%. If aggressive scenario where he puts up 20-25% on this country, that country, I think we're looking at an average rate of about 8-9%. A negotiated scenario would be around 3-4%, let's say, and a moderate scenario is 6-7%. So right now it's 2-3%. Negotiated scenario is 3-4%. Moderate scenario, say 5-6-7%, and an aggressive scenario where we go into tariff war, you're looking at 8-9-10% average rate. By the end of this year, where do you think the average tariff rate on US imports is going to be?
Right. So this really hinges on two issues. If the Europeans will do counter tariffs, which they've said they're going to postpone for now, they have a mandate to reimpose 2018 tariffs on $4.5 billion euros, of US products by the 1st of April. But they're also saying they're going to push it back a little. So that means negotiations. And the second one, of course, is how will these tariffs be calculated? Because he's basically calculated as 25% on all goods with lots of exemptions. He's never really detailed what these exemptions will be. He said broadly, therefore, the automotive industry and a few other things, but not really what that means. So I believe we need to wait. But my guess is the Europeans will put tariffs on the US. It will lead to a trade war where throughout the year, tariffs increase, and there will be a negotiated settlement at some point. Probably not by the end of the year, though. I mean, tariffs are not something, if you look historically, when America had many tariff issues with Australia and the early EU, the proto-EU with mostly France and Germany back in the early 90s. And it lasted 2 years. It was over extremely petty issues like meat, fleece, and other things. And it took 2 years to finish. And the negotiations were drawn out. No one felt like they had won. But that was it. But these are way more important. This is on steel. This is on automotives. This is on foodstuffs. It might take years, in my opinion, because he essentially is asking for a new trade treaty. Think about it, right? He wants to renegotiate the actual trade treaties that were signed back in the 90s. So those negotiations through Howard-Lutnick are going to take a while. And that's my opinion.
Okay, so basically no change, status quo through the end of this year, and maybe some negotiated agreement next year.
According to what Howard-Lutnick has said, they're not going to move away from it. So yeah, you're right. Towards the end of the year, there'll be no change. But he keeps on bringing up, we need to change the treaties. We need to change the rules. It's unfair. So I can't see that being looked
Well,
at.
the problem is if the status quo average tariff rate of about 2-3% stays through the end of the year, you're looking at a very large budget deficit because Doge isn't cutting anything. I mean, they're just talking really. They talk about all this fraud. There's not a single person arrested, which is incredible, which is bullshit. I mean, he's just bullshitting basically. So without any sort of material cuts to Social Security or other entitlements, and growing deficit spending, then I can only see the long rates. I think are going to continue to rise. Then, do you agree with that?
Though, if this happens, if long-term rates do rise, what would it do in terms of global growth?
Yeah, exactly. There will be a recession. So, do you expect long-run interest rates to continue to rise?
Yes, but there's a caveat. there's not enough room to cut once the recession ends. So typically, the point of recession is that towards the end of it, the central banks have room to cut because interest rates are already heightened enough that they can go down 100 or 200 basis points. And then usually that's the indicator that the recession will come to an end at some point. There have to be pro-growth policies. Outside of the US, do any of these countries have that? They can't, you're right.
So US can't cut hundreds of basis points. I mean, obviously, right? They have 4% interest rates right now. Do you think that's going to be necessary? Do you think the Fed's going to have to lower rates to 0%?
Typically, you have significant interest rate cuts if it's a real recession. I don't know of any exceptions to that.
You don't answer my question.
The answer to your question is yes. You're right. They will have to be significant cuts to 0 to bring us out of a real recession.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to have to cut until lower bound again.
What's the point of having high rates then?
Well, first of all, I mean, we're so far away from that point right now. Look, right now, the Fed is worried more about inflation than a recession, obviously, right? People say the Fed is waiting to cut rates again and everything. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they're looking at these inflation expectations rising, even though Powell isn't raising the alarm on them yet, because long run inflation expectations are lower. But these near-term inflation expectations can't feed into long-run inflation expectations, right? So I think we're going to know a lot in the next few weeks here with these tariff negotiations. So Jimmy says Europe will definitely raise tariffs, which is a big prediction. That's a big prediction, Jimmy, because
I don't think it is.
Because Europe also, does obviously value-added tax on U.S. imports. Not much, but Tesla doesn't export much to Europe at all. I don't think Tesla exports anything to Europe at this point. They just produce there. Yeah, interesting prediction.
Let me ask you a real question. What do you think the growth forecast it is right now by Federal Reserve to be 1.7%? Do you think that is an accurate figure?
What do you mean by accurate figure? That's the fact for you think it's going to be 1.7? No, I think it's going to be negative. I think we're going to a recession.
Wow.
Yeah, I think we're going to.
And it seems like you're not even a bear. It just seems like what you're trying to say is if you were neutral, there's going to be a negative. It's going to be negative. And it's going to be negative in the US, but globally it'll also be negative. And yet they might slap retaliatory tariffs, despite knowing it will be negative.
They don't know that. They don't know if it's going to be negative. I don't think many people are expecting a recession. I think the only other person forecasting a more than 50% probability of a recession right now is Jeffrey Gundlach. I don't know of another single person. Do you?
No, I mean, it's so hard. When you go to Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and others, they often sound very bullish when things are very tough.
The only other person that came to 50-50, close to 50-50 is Larry Summers. So it's me, Jeffrey Gundlach, and Larry Summers who are on the basically recession camp. But Larry Summers caveated it, saying, unless if the Trump administration does a 180 on their tariff policy, and then we got the Trump tweet or post or whatever about basically going reciprocal, whatever, which very unclear too. So I don't know. I also don't think it's necessarily about the tariffs either, but it doesn't help. Obviously, the uncertainty doesn't help. The consumer confidence index that came out today is ridiculously bad. The Conference Board. So this is not the University of Michigan one. This is the Conference Board consumer confidence. And the employment expectations are really bad. I mean, for the next fewer jobs expectations for the rest of the year has surged to recessionary levels, highest since 2011. Outlook is worse in 12 years. Employment outlook is worse in 14 years. And that's before these tariffs go up. And I think they will have to go up at some point because I don't think it's just a negotiation tactic. I think that the reason why he's doing the tariffs first before taxes is because he needs hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs to extend the tax cuts. If he extend, I don't think he can extend the tax cuts without additional revenue. And don't look at Doge for savings. Doge is not saving anything. They create a website where they throw some numbers that are proven to be wrong by 3 orders of magnitude. And like one person said on X, if this was an analyst working for you, they would be fired on the spot. If an analyst missed a number by 3 orders of magnitude, and like, let's say investment banking work, they would be fired on the spot. No question. And yet, this is what the kind of $300 million of political donations gets you. It kind of gets you protected employment and the protection of the FBI for your stores. Magic, how are you?
Good, good. How's it going?
It's going well. What's new with you?
Nothing much. Just wanted to, well, we'll talk about accounting ops. We'll switch to accounting at some other point, but just wanted to make a comment that I think the stock market and the economy are definitely different, right? I mean, the economy, I think, under the surface is not great, and the stock market pretty much has been driven by, deficit spending and AI hype. So once stocks kind of, and the wealth effect really. So once stocks kind of reverse and or the AI bubble doesn't live up to the hype, then then the wealthy will get scared, start selling their stocks. So it's the wealth effect has been a big driver. Nvidia goes up, you feel richer, you buy something. Nvidia goes up, right? So the stock market has gone up for 2 years straight, which has helped a lot of people spend. And you see that in the data that I think about like 50-60% of consumer spending is done by the top 10%. I think is the largest gap in history. I'm not sure about those numbers exactly, but approximately that's what we've observed recently. So if the wealthy don't feel that wealth effect by stocks continuing to just go straight up and volatility being low, then they're going to pull back their spending at some point.
Yeah, I don't think it's that simple, but yeah, I definitely agree with your wealth effect. But on the other hand, it's only dropped a few percent. I mean, come on. I don't think the wealth effect is there yet.
Yeah, I think stocks have to drop a bit more and not, I think people are still pretty confident. It looks like retail's buying the dip. From what I'm
Retail's
seeing.
buying the dip. That's correct. Yep, retail's definitely buying the dip.
So I don't know. Institutions aren't as bullish as retail buying the dip. So that usually kind of worries me in terms of the quality of the rally.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was gonna say, did you guys go over that the accounting article? I think you had some rebuttals on some of that. I don't know if you want to switch topics.
Yeah. I mean, I did kind of point out that some of the capex might not be classified in PP&E. It might be the Shanghai mega factory that's been under the operating leases on the balance sheet. So as I said, I'm not worried about it. And I guess Financial Times just published another kind of mea culpa on that. So, and I kind of skimmed through it just now, but it doesn't really say exactly why they were wrong. It kind of just gives a bunch of reasons that why they might be wrong or something. So it just seems like a very poor article on their part. But yeah, I'm not worried about
I think the main.
Go ahead.
So I think the main thing is, I don't know of any situation where, accumulated depreciation goes higher than depreciation expense for the quarter. I mean, that's is a very strange anomaly. I don't think we've gotten an answer for, but that's the only thing.
Okay. Yeah, man, it's so crazy how these people, the head of this in San Francisco, and I think the other guy was from New York, and they write this article, publish this article, make some extreme accusations without actually knowing what the hell's going on, and then they have to pull it back. It's amazing. And I think Magic, you should learn the lesson that just because it's published on Financial Times doesn't mean it's true. That it's not worth kind of raising hell over one headline. And that when I say Tesla's accounting is probably sound, you should give me a bit more credit for that. Don't you think?
I Look, the thing is, I'm not gonna believe everything that's in the news. The big thing is somebody at Tesla Q was raising that about a year or two ago. So it was like we've already known about the kind of proper PPE roll forward, just like it didn't roll. So we're just like that's strange. So when they published the article, I thought that was based on the same information. So it wasn't like some random person posted something. We didn't do any of the research and we did it.
It doesn't
Right?
matter who posted it. It doesn't matter. Like, I think the lesson here is that it doesn't matter who posted it. It's either true or not true. And I explained a million times to Tesla Q over the last decade that Tesla's accounting is probably sound. It's highly unlikely that there would be a material misstatement just because of the nature of the business, the simplicity of the financial statements, etc.
Yeah.
And also the spotlight from multiple, countries and dozens of analysts just on the sell side, hundreds and thousands of analysts on the buy side. It's extremely unlikely that there would be something material misstatement on Tesla accounting issues. It's a very simple company to account for. It's not like Solar City. Solar City is a different story. I mean, I just remember poring over the 50-page presentations they did when Tesla acquired Solar City. I'm kind of scratching my head like, it doesn't make any fucking sense. But and then I published the first article I ever published on Tesla was it doesn't matter if the acquisition makes sense or the accounting makes sense. What matters is top 5 investors on both companies are the exact same, and they're going to follow what Elon says, and the transaction went through. Anyway, Mea culpa, says Financial Times, having last week got rather excited by the minuity of Tesla's accounting, it's time to, and grammar mistake, roll back on the apparent $1.4 billion gap between capital investment and asset values. I think it's a waste of time. Ekti?
Well, the Tesla Q has been saying that Tesla has its quality issues for a long time, and it has proven to be correct. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the Cybertruck quality is definitely worse than I could
Not
have
just
imagined.
Cybertruck. Model 3s, Model Ys, all of it. Especially if
I don't know if Model 3, Model Y production quality is, let's say, worse than Ford. Ford is leading the industry when it comes to this kind of stuff.
In Germany, they got quite bad quality. I think it was one of the worst after 2 years of ownership. So
yeah, I think Tesla's main problem. Cybertruck is horrendous. Cybertruck program, I think, is going to end soon, and it's just completely disappointing on so many fronts. But also the other Achilles heel of Tesla, I think, is service. When people, especially female buyers, service is a big deal for them. Service, reliability, kind of that brand image around. So Toyota, RAV4 or Lexus, which is under the Toyota brand, obviously, hybrids are in such high demand when it comes to female buyers. And Teslas obviously are mostly the average buyer of a Tesla are a white male in their 50s with under $50,000 of income. And it's not going to change anytime soon. But Jimmy, question for you. Or actually, and then Magic. Jimmy and Magic. Okay. Assume Tesla doesn't achieve robotaxis at scale. So it's just like demo business. And then Tesla gives up on Optimus. So ends the program. What is the value of Tesla? Intrinsic value of Tesla without robotaxis and Optimus?
Well, I don't think they're ever going to give up on robotaxis. Just as you said, it may never come. But as for Optimus, before I answer the question valuation, Optimus will probably be handed over to SpaceX because the only real value of Optimus is at that scale, meaning like a handful of Optimus. It will be useful for
Jimmy,
solar
Jimmy,
flights.
you're going on a tangent that is completely
Okay. The valuation will be at least
Forget-
1/10 of the value right now.
Yeah. Magic?
Yeah, I would say Optimus is a way bigger stretch than robotaxis. I can definitely see them doing robotaxis. I just think it's going to be too little, too late on a low margin business. So by the time they get there, I think Waymo's going to dominate most markets. So it's going to be difficult. Either way, I think it's just low margin overall. But yeah, around $50, I would say, on the optimistic side.
Yeah, I would agree with that. 1/10 of
Jimmy?
the top value.
Okay. $50 per
because
share.
it's
And
a commodity. It's just a commodity
Yeah.
at that point. It's the same as every other car company, has the same PE
Yeah.
valuation. It would be that value.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I do find it funny though that SpaceX will be way more valuable in the future than Tesla. That is something of a little bit of an irony.
Yeah, TBD. Let's go to Ekti first, and I'm going to ask a question for Magic and then Jimmy, and then we're going to call it. Ekti?
So Tesla, I was surprised that Tesla isn't making money in China. So if they're not making in China after investing so much money in EVs for over a decade, I mean, what are we betting on? Robots? It's probably gonna take
Yeah.
another 10 years. I mean, what's the value
Yeah,
of the stock?
Alan Lapterry says, "How is Tesla losing money in China?" It's just that I don't think anyone. I certainly did not see the competition from China coming this fast. I mean, when I saw BYD ramp schedules, like how easily they're ramping new products, that opened my eyes about a year or two ago. That the competition in China is way, way more than I ever imagined. Ever since then, the fact that Xiaomi can come out with a car that is better than a Model 3 for cheaper and literally demolish Model 3's market to the extent that Tesla has to cut prices repeatedly and then on top of that offer 0% financing rate for a car that is less than 1 year old. New Model 3 that's less than 1 year old. And there's no demand basically. It's like you can get one for 1 week now. That's stunning. And the Model Y, which sells for a few $1,000s more, maybe makes a little bit more money on Model Y long range and everything. That's facing the same end results. In the next 6 to 9 months, Tesla is going to have to offer. Actually, Tesla is offering 0% financing rate for the new Model Y today in China after 2 months of production. And I think Tesla in China benefited in the last couple of years from the fact that EV market share was growing, and the Chinese automotive market was growing. So as the rising tide lifts all boats. Tesla benefited from that. Tesla bulls kind of found solace in the rising registration numbers, but the Chinese automotive market stopped growing. And now most car sales are EVs. So that's both tailwinds gone. Now we're going to see the actual, if BYD and Xiaomi want to grow, they're going to have to take share from Tesla. There's nobody else to take share from. All the ICE manufacturers, left the country. So I think what's going to happen is Tesla China is going to see factory utilization decline, which means fixed costs will be spread over fewer sales. And Tesla is already losing money in China, and those losses will grow. Meaning Tesla will at some point have to pull the plug on the Giga Shanghai factory. One key reason I didn't mention to answer Alan's question, one key reason why Tesla's losing money in China is because people, 80%, I think 80-90% of sales in China are the base model. So just the one motor, real-wheel drive models. And Tesla doesn't make much money on those. In the US, people are in love with all-wheel drive, long range, etc. So Tesla makes a little bit of money. And in the US, Tesla doesn't have the competition from BYD, Xiaomi because of government protectionism by both Biden and Trump, by the way. And now the question for Magic. If you were the CEO of Tesla today and your goal was to ensure long-term success with robotaxis and Optimus, what steps would you take?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it might upset some of the bulls, but I think if they do include LiDAR, I think the robotaxi thing becomes really real fast. If they do include LiDAR, so that'd be the first step. But that's just me. Optimus, I have no idea. That's a very complicated new market, so I wouldn't have any idea. I'd probably just hire the best robotics person and try to give them as much equity as possible, see if they can do something. But it's a very demanding market. Yeah.
All right, Jimmy. Now the next question for you: if you're the CEO of Tesla, and your sole goal is to ensure success for Tesla robotaxis and Optimus, what steps would you take?
The steps would be relatively straightforward. Partner with SpaceX for Optimus. Prove that it would actually work by having it go on a trans-solar flight to Mars, where radiation is the main killer, and use that R&D money from the SpaceX side to have the funds to actually build Optimus. Iterate over time, and don't make it a retail product. Make it into an enterprise product. For robo-taxis, the solution is very, very simple, and it's something that people will not like. It is to partner with all the Chinese companies who are pouring tons of money into it, who are already stealing the information from you anyway with their own moles at Tesla, and to basically push it out as quickly as possible. I want to see a conglomerate like you saw at the European and Japanese conglomerates who work together, although those high-tech EV products often did not work. But I think with China it would work. I think that Elon Musk could help out with this if he would not be the CEO. And there'd be an exemption for these companies. I think it'd be a great way of national, international unity and partnerships. I think that BYD, NIO, a handful of others, even Xiaomi, working with Tesla to get a joint robotaxi, because they have to admit it's a commodity. It would become a commodity. It's no longer no matter what brand it is. That common agreement would lead to a very quick robotaxi. Tons of data would be collected, and lots of R&D funding required. But it would be very likely to happen a lot sooner. It's so saturated now. Every single company in their own little silo doing the same things, very few differences, going through the same process with iterations. It makes no sense to have it separate. And that is what I would do.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We're going to end it there. Thank you very much, everybody. And I will chat with you all next time. Take care.